In this movie, we'll take on another popular internet meme. This one revolves around the notion that all ducks are actually wearing dog masks. So you can see that we have this mallard open up on screen, and that his yellow bill resembles a dog's face. But not enough in my opinion, which is why we're going to doll things up in order to create this effect right here. The great thing about this effect, having shown it around to a few people, if I zoom out to take in the entire image, and this is the first time you've actually seen the photo, I found that many people, it just sort of dawns on them over time that there's something that's been done to the duck. At first, they see the tongue hanging out of the duck's mouth, and then they notice that there are whiskers and eyes and a nose and so forth. All right, so I'm going to switch back to my base image, which is called malemallard.psd. And I also have open this dog's face right there that we're going to superimpose over the bill. Now notice that I'm viewing the dog at 100%, so this is a low resolution image. Now normally when you're thinking of transforming an image, which is what we're going to do here, you would start with a high resolution image and scale it downward. That way you will keep as much detail as possible. The thing is, because we're going to be applying a 4-point distortion and a very heavy duty distortion as well, if you apply such a distortion to a high-resolution image, you end up getting choppy results. You end up getting jagged results. So you're better off starting with a low-resolution image in the first place. That gives you smoother results, as we'll see. All right, I'm going to right-click inside this image using one of the selection tools. And then I'll choose the Duplicate Layer command. I'll go ahead and send this layer to malemallard.psd. And let's call this new layer Dog and click OK. All right, now let's switch back to that image. There's the dog, so I'll Control or Command drag him up into place there so that we can match him to the bill. Now, because we're going to be applying transformation, I want it to be a non-destructive transformation, so with this layer selected, I'll go up to the Layers panel flyout menu and I'll choose Convert to Smart Object, and that way we can modify the distortion later if we need to without harming the image. All right, I'm going to drag the dog layer to the top of the stack and press the 5 key to reduce the opacity of the dog to 50% so that we can see the bill in the background. Now, the interesting thing about the bill, if I move the dog over for a moment, notice that the width of the bill is pretty uniform down the entire length, whereas the dog's face actually tapers. So we start with his relatively big skull, and then his face tapers down to his snout. That's why we need to distort this image so heavily. All right, I'm going to Control drag or Command drag him back more or less into place. And if you're working along with me, then you can bring up some guidelines that I've created for you in advance. Go up to the View menu, choose Show, and then choose Guides if you're not already seeing them, or you can press the keyboard shortcut Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac. I'm going to scroll my image up just a little bit here. And now let's drag the dog down just a little bit as well. All right, now that I can see all of my guidelines, I'll go to the Edit menu and choose the Free Transform command, or you can press Control T or Command T on the Mac. And now I'm going to go ahead and drag this bottom handle downward until it snaps into alignment with that horizontal guide, as you see there. To take advantage of the next step, you need to make sure that your guides are locked down, so go up to the View menu and make sure the Lock Guides command is turned on. If it's not, go ahead and choose it. Then I want you to press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac, which allows you to drag a corner handle independently of the other corner handles. And I'm going to drag this guy over to this location. I'll also press the Shift key as well. So I'm pressing Control-Shift as I drag. That would be Command-Shift on the Mac. Now I'm going to Control-Shift or Command-Shift drag this lower left handle like so. And then finally, I'm going to Control-drag this top handle to this location right there, this top intersection, as you can see. And I'll Control-drag this top right corner to this point right there, to this slightly lower guide intersection. And then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to apply that modification. And you can see that we've pretty well distorted the heck out of this dog's face. Now, one of his eyes isn't quite in alignment, so I'm going to double-click on the thumbnail for the dog layer in order to open it inside of a new image window. If you get this warning, just click OK. And now, go ahead and roughly select this right eye, like so. Just using the rectangular marquee tool is fine, and I'm going to move that guy over just a little bit. Then I'll press Control-Alt-J or Command-Option-J on the Mac to jump the selection. I'll call this new layer Eye, and I'll click OK. Then I'll press Control-Shift left arrow or Command-Shift left arrow to nudge that eye over to the left. Now this doesn't look right at all, but it's going to work out beautifully. All right, now you can close the image and then click the Yes button here on the PC. You click the Save button on the Mac in order to update that smart object inside the composition. All right, now press the 0 key in order to restore the opacity to 100%. And you can see what I was talking about there. Notice that down here at the snout, we have some very soft transitions. Obviously, we're interpolating up, which means that we're diminishing the resolution of the image. But up here toward the top of the dog, where his eyes are, we're getting somewhat jagged results at this point. This jaggedness would be even more noticeable if we were working with a higher resolution image. All right, I'm going to zoom back out. Now let's go ahead and paint in some details from the dog onto the duck. And we'll do that by alt-clicking or option-clicking on this Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. And what that does is it creates a black layer mask, so we're effectively masking away everything on that layer. Now go ahead and grab the brush tool, which you can get by pressing the B key. And we want a hard brush here, so go ahead and right-click inside the image window, crank the hardness value up to 100%. You can modify the size value on the fly, but I'm starting off at 15 pixels. Then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change. Press the X key in order to make the foreground color white, if necessary. And then start painting in that snout like so. And you want to paint it up pretty high like this. And notice I'm not doing the world's best job at this point. I'm just trying to get it roughed in so I can see what I'm doing. All right, having done that, I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit so that I have a little more control. And having painted in too much snout, I'll press the X key in order to switch the foreground color back to black. And I'll begin clicking and shift clicking around the snout like so. And the fact that I'm clicking and then shift clicking is creating straight lines between my click and shift click points. So I'll click here, shift click at this location, shift click down like so. So I keep shift clicking all the way down to the bottom of the snout. I'll click right there. I'll shift click at this point, shift click here as well. Might need to paint a little bit of that away, actually right there. Then click at that point, shift click, and we're pretty much done. With the exception of the fact that the snout is not tapering and all of a sudden just appears. So I'm going to increase the size of my cursor by pressing the right bracket key a few times. Then I'll right-click inside the image window and I'll crank the hardness value down to 0%. And press the Enter key or the Return key in order to hide that panel. And now I'll paint a blurry brush stroke like so across the top of the snout so it just sort of emerges into view. All right, that's good where the snout is concerned. Now we need to paint in the eyes. So reduce the size of the cursor a little bit. We're going to continue to work with the soft brush here. Press the X key to switch the foreground color to white. And let's just go ahead and paint in this eye. They should be right there on the duck nostrils right there. Just go ahead and paint the eyes in. Then I'm going to reduce the size of my cursor, right-click again. Let's change the hardness value to something like 90% this time. Press the Enter key a couple of times in order to hide that panel. Press the X key in order to switch the foreground color back to black, and let's click and shift click like so to get rid of that little bit of dimple at the side of the dog's face. That's too much, actually. So I'll press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo that change. I do want to get rid of this area, however. So I'll just click and shift click my way up. Let's increase the size of the brush a little bit, paint away some of these other details potentially. I went too far once again, so I'll press Control Z, Command Z on the Mac. Let's right click inside the image window and change the hardness value to, let's say, 50% this time. Press the Enter key, and then reduce the size of the cursor by pressing the left bracket key and paint around the dog's eyes just a little bit in order to hide some of those dog eye details. All right, so there you have it. We've now managed to map the dog's face onto the duck's bill, but we're still missing a few details. We need to go ahead and add the mouth and the tongue and the whiskers and all that jazz, and we will do so in the very next movie.